In the dead of night in Jerusalem, something woke me. A pillow struck my face in the darkness, and I came awake gasping, disoriented, unable to see. The room was black and close and wrong. Flies were buzzing somewhere in the pitch dark, and I knew before I could even think it clearly that something in that room was not supposed to be there. I was flat on my face on the bed before I understood what I was doing, and words were coming out of my mouth, not screaming, commands. You're not invited here. You don't belong here. Leave and never bother us again. Jesus has got this. I was a woman who had spent her whole life learning to be afraid. I was the last person you expect to find standing her ground in a dark room in Jerusalem at 3:30 in the morning. And yet, that's the opening of my book. I'm Christy Sullivan, and this is why I wrote it. Here's the thing. The night in Jerusalem isn't actually where the story starts. It's where the book starts, because it's the movement everything else in my life has been building toward. But the real beginning is a lot smaller and a lot earlier. I was 4 years old. We had this cherry wood piano in the house, and I used it all the time, and I started playing it at age 3. At 4, I composed my very first piece. I called it Swaying Trees. I didn't know it at the time, but I had already figured something out that took me 40 more years to actually live. Trees that sway in storms don't break. I was 4, and somehow I already knew that. The piano became the one room in my house that was safe. When things were tense, and they often were, I'd sit down, put my hands on those keys, and I'd be somewhere else, somewhere safe. That's really what this whole book is. It's the story of a girl who found one safe room at 4 years old and spent the next 4 decades looking for that same feeling everywhere else in her life, until she finally found it somewhere she didn't expect. After Jerusalem, something shifted in me. The book talks about this. I came home, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I was hungry for God in a way I'd never let myself be before. For a while after that, the Holy Spirit kept prompting me to write this book, and I've learned that obedience is the most important thing to God. So when that prompting kept coming, I couldn't ignore it. There was an urgency to it too. My grandmother, I call her Momsy, is still here, and I wanted more than anything for her to hear the story before she graduates to heaven. And it wasn't just me feeling it. Several devotional speakers who came through my workplace kept almost independently pointing me toward telling my story. A couple of years before I even sat down to write the book, I actually gave a talk at work where I shared a lot of these stories for the first time, and that talk became most of the raw material this book is built from. Once I sat down to actually write it, the hardest part wasn't remembering what happened. It was putting it all in chronological order and filling in the details. And then, almost before I knew it, several months had passed, and the book was done. Even finding my publisher happened fast. I asked God to open doors and make the whole process seamless, so I'd know without a doubt it was Him. And He did. People ask me which chapter was hardest to write. It was chapter 3, the double life. I talked about this with the people closest to me before, but putting it to paper was different. That chapter is about growing up with a father who thought verbal and physical abuse was about how you controlled a house that felt out of control. Writing it meant reliving those memories in detail, not just remembering them in passing, and even after years of therapy, I was in tears going through it. I prayed over that chapter for a long time because I never wanted to dishonor my parents. But this is a huge part of my origin story. It's where some of my most crippling anxiety came from, so it had to be told. I tried to tell it in a way that doesn't hurt them, but instead helps all of us see how human and broken we all are, especially me. It's also the chapter I'm most glad exists now, because I know there are people out there living something similar and not sure what to do with it. My hope is that whoever reads it, they could see where they stand and what to do next. One thing that's woven through the whole book structurally, not just as a metaphor, It's built in 5 movements, like a piece of music. Movement 1 is called the first notes. That's childhood and the foundations of who I'd become. That's where swaying trees happens. Movement 2 is the bridge. Young adulthood, losing my faith, and a door that almost opened. Movement 3 is Tennessee. Graduate school, love, marriage, and building a new life. And then movement 4 is the storm, the trials that broke me open. And movement 5 is arrival, where Jerusalem happens, where everything the first 4 movements have been building toward finally resolves. In the introduction, I wrote that Jerusalem Night was the last note of a symphony that had been building my entire life, a piece I could not hear in full while I was living it. That's not just a way to talk about my life. It's actually how I experienced it looking back. None of it made sense as it was happening. It only became a symphony when I could finally hear the whole thing at once. If you've read this far into a video about a book, I'm guessing something in this resonated. Maybe it's fear. Maybe you've spent your whole life managing fear instead of actually being free of it. Maybe it's the faith. Maybe you grew up in a church and you're not sure you've ever actually experienced God. Not really. Maybe it's the exhaustion of carrying something you don't have a name for yet. I didn't write this book because I have it all figured out. I wrote it because I know what it's like to function while carrying something heavy. And I know what it felt like the night I finally put it down. "You're not invited here" became more than something I said once in a hotel room. It became something I say now to fear, to old patterns, to anything trying to convince me I'm still that girl bracing for the worst. If there's a version of you that's tired of being afraid, this book was written for you. The title I held is coming soon. If any part of this resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow along here and on Instagram. I'm Christy Sullivan, author on both. I'll be sharing more of these stories in the weeks leading up to the launch. And if you've got a question about the book or about Jerusalem, any of it, drop it in the comments. I'm putting together a Q&A video and I'd genuinely love to answer yours. Thanks for being here.